In a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in suburban USA, sat a sprawling mansion that had seen decades pass by. The house wasn't just brick and mortar. It was a testament to a lifetime of hard work, careful planning, and dreams realized. Within those walls lived Alina and Henry, a couple well into their 70s, yet sharp-minded and dignified. Their hands bore the marks of a life of labor and love. Their eyes reflected wisdom, earned through decades of navigating the world together. Despite their age, Alina and Henry moved with purpose. Every morning, Henry would stroll through the gardens, pruning roses he had planted 50 years ago, while Alina brewed coffee in a kitchen filled with memories, the faint scent of spices, the faint hum of life that once filled the house with laughter. Their wealth was substantial. Generations had admired their property, but what they cherished most was each other. They had one son, Thomas, a man who had grown up under their careful guidance but had always struggled to assert himself. Weak-willed and easily influenced, he had married a woman named Veronica, who smiled too much and spoke too sweetly, a smile that hid ambition far sharper than it seemed. At first, Veronica's behavior seemed harmless. She polished the silver, arranged the living room, and offered to help with groceries. Alina, ever polite, welcomed her with warm smiles. Believing in family loyalty, Henry, wary but polite, nodded in quiet observation. But as weeks passed, subtle changes emerged. Veronica began steering Thomas in decisions, small at first, what they should invest in, which properties to sell, even how Alina and Henry should manage their estate. Alina noticed the sly glances, the careful manipulation, but could not voice it outright. Henry, ever patient, watched, calculating quietly. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the marble floors, Veronica cornered Thomas in the study. "We should sign over the house," she said, voice dripping with concern. "It will be easier for everyone if the property is in both our names." Thomas hesitated. He glanced at his mother, then at his father, and finally at Veronica. He had always wanted peace, wanted to avoid confrontation. "Okay, if you think it's best," he murmured, signing the papers without realizing the storm he had unleashed. That night, Alina sat by the fireplace, her hands folded, heart heavy. "Henry," she whispered, "I think she's after more than just comfort. I fear she wants everything we've built." Henry's jaw tightened. "We won't let greed erase a lifetime of effort," he said quietly, eyes scanning the darkened room. "We'll be careful, patient, and we will outsmart them." Outside, the wind rattled the old trees, a foreshadowing of the conflict that would soon shake the house to its very foundation. Within these walls, loyalty would clash with ambition, wisdom with cunning, and love would face betrayal. The game had begun. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion that had once echoed with warmth now felt heavy with tension. Veronica's smile had grown sharper, more calculated. She hovered around Thomas constantly, whispering suggestions, guiding him in ways that subtly undermined Alina and Henry. Alina noticed the small things first. Her favorite teacup, once carefully placed on the sideboard, was now missing. Henry's tools in the garden were rearranged, leaving him searching. Veronica insisted it was for convenience, but Alina saw the subtle control creeping in. Thomas, meanwhile, drifted further into his wife's influence. The son, who had once been obedient to his parents' guidance, now nodded at Veronica without hesitation, as if he were surrendering his own judgment. Every decision regarding the property, every discussion about finances, was now filtered through her eyes. One morning, Veronica approached Alina in the kitchen, her tone sweet yet biting. "Mom, why don't you let me handle the bills? You have enough to enjoy your days without worrying." Alina's heart sank. It wasn't concern, it was domination. Veronica wanted control. That evening, as Henry read by the fire, Alina shared her unease. "Henry, she's taking everything we built for ourselves. And Thomas, he doesn't even see it." Henry closed his book slowly. "It's worse than I feared. But rushing won't help. We need a plan. Patience is our weapon." Veronica, meanwhile, was already laying the groundwork. She began documenting every move the grandparents made, notes about their routines, subtle recordings of conversations, even manipulating household staff to report on them. She was building a case to make Thomas see his parents as obstacles, as outdated and incapable, while presenting herself as the only one capable of managing the wealth. Weeks later, the first major blow landed. The legal papers were drawn up, listing her name alongside Thomas on every property, every bank account, every asset. The moment Thomas signed, a subtle shift occurred in the household. Veronica no longer masked her ambition. She spoke openly about managing their assets, pushing Alina and Henry aside, dictating terms with chilling precision. The grandparents, though wounded, did not panic. Alina's hands trembled slightly as she clutched a photograph of their early years. But Henry's gaze was steady. "We've survived storms before," he whispered. "This is just another storm. And storms can be weathered with intelligence, patience, and courage." That night, Alina lay awake, thinking of the years spent building a life filled with love, laughter, and respect. She realized that while Veronica may have legal power, she could never touch the wisdom, resilience, or moral strength that Alina and Henry carried. The battle lines were drawn, the house they had built, the memories they had cherished, and the very essence of their lives were under threat. But Alina and Henry were not ready to surrender. Outside, the mansion seemed darker than ever, shadows stretching like fingers across the walls, a silent witness to the brewing war within. The following weeks were a tense dance of manipulation and quiet defiance. Veronica believed she had cornered Alina and Henry, but the elderly couple was far from defeated. Though physically frail at times, their minds were sharp, their experience deep, and their patience unshakable. Veronica's tactics became bolder. She rearranged their schedules, insisting they accept new caretakers, and subtly questioned their judgment in front of neighbors and staff. Thomas, trapped between loyalty to his parents and obedience to his wife, hesitated and faltered. His once gentle voice now carried uncertainty, echoing Veronica's suggestions. Alina observed silently. She noted Veronica's habits, the times she was most confident, the moments she became careless. Henry, meanwhile, quietly contacted trusted friends and financial advisors, discreetly reviewing the property documents and ensuring that nothing could be immediately liquidated without their knowledge. One afternoon, Veronica cornered Alina in the sunlit garden. "Mom," she said, voice sweet as honey, "why don't you let me manage your schedule? I can take care of everything, so you don't tire yourself." Alina, gripping her gardening gloves tightly, smiled faintly but said nothing. Inside, she knew every word was a trap, designed to make her seem incapable, to break her spirit. That evening, Henry shared his plan. "We wait, observe, and act when the moment is right. Greed has a way of making people careless. We will let her make the first mistake." Their patience bore fruit faster than expected. Veronica, in her arrogance, began showing her true colors to the household staff, berating them for trivial mistakes, flaunting her control, and speaking disdainfully of Alina and Henry. A small but crucial error emerged. She left signed documents on the dining table unattended, revealing her complete reliance on Thomas's compliance. Alina quietly documented every action, taking photographs and notes. Henry ensured the couple's finances were inaccessible without their consent, giving them leverage they could use when the time came. Thomas remained oblivious to the growing tension, more entangled in his wife's ambitions than ever. Veronica, convinced of her victory, failed to notice the calm intelligence with which the grandparents prepared their subtle countermeasures. One night, Alina whispered to Henry, "We've lived through hardship, deceit, and betrayal before. This is nothing new. Our wisdom is stronger than her cunning." Henry nodded, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "And patience, patience will be our weapon. Let her greed show itself fully, and the world will see the truth." Outside, the mansion's windows glimmered faintly in the moonlight, silent witnesses to a war of wit and will, where the meek were underestimated, and the cunning would eventually face consequences. Veronica's confidence swelled like a tidal wave, blind to the quiet storm brewing within the mansion. She paraded through the house, dictating terms, flaunting her control, and speaking down to Alina and Henry as if they were incapable of thought. Thomas, now a shadow of his former self, obediently nodded, signing papers and agreeing to her whims without question. But arrogance often precedes downfall. One afternoon, Veronica, eager to finalize yet another property transfer, left the signed documents carelessly on the dining table, distracted by a call from a financial advisor. Alina, observing quietly from the kitchen doorway, noticed immediately. She signaled Henry, who had been in the library reviewing old legal contracts. "We have the leverage we need," Henry whispered. That evening, as Veronica and Thomas sat in the sunroom, Alina and Henry executed their subtle plan. They invited a trusted family lawyer to the house under the guise of discussing estate taxes. Veronica, oblivious to the trap, boasted of her management skills, speaking arrogantly about her control over the property. The lawyer, patient and precise, carefully examined the documents Veronica had left unattended. He pointed out multiple irregularities in the transfers, mistakes she had made out of overconfidence. These signatures, he said, gesturing calmly, may not hold up under scrutiny. Certain assets were transferred improperly. You could face serious legal consequences if challenged. Veronica's confident smile faltered. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that something was amiss. Alina, sitting gracefully with hands folded, met Henry's eyes. The message was clear. Patience and observation were more powerful than brute force. Over the next few days, Alina and Henry quietly strengthened their position. They secured critical documents, double-checked accounts, and discreetly communicated with legal and financial advisors. Veronica, blinded by her greed and overconfidence, continued to alienate staff and manipulate her husband, leaving her exposed. One evening, as Veronica barked orders at the housekeeper, Alina stepped forward with calm authority. Veronica, you've overstepped. Your decisions are putting the household at risk, and your approach is disrespectful. Veronica, shocked by Alina's direct confrontation, hesitated. Her composure cracked for the first time, revealing the vulnerability Alina and Henry had been waiting for. Henry, standing beside his wife, added softly but firmly, "We've lived long enough to know when someone is acting out of greed rather than respect. Your actions have consequences, and it's time you understand them." For the first time, the power dynamic shifted. Veronica realized she was no longer untouchable. And Thomas, seeing his parents' strength and composure, felt a twinge of guilt. The grandparents' patience, strategy, and quiet resilience had begun to turn the tide. Outside, the night wind whispered through the mansion's trees, as if nature itself was heralding the coming reckoning. The stage was set, and Veronica's first real misstep had awakened a force she had underestimated for far too long. The following weeks were tense and electric. Veronica, now aware that Alina and Henry were not as powerless as she had assumed, tried to tighten her grip, but her arrogance made her reckless. She began openly insulting the grandparents, demanding obedience from household staff, and flaunting her supposed authority. Every act of aggression, however, revealed her impatience and greed more clearly than she realized. Alina and Henry, on the other hand, remained calm and calculated. They reinforced bonds with loyal staff, quietly documenting every interaction, every threat, every act of disrespect. Every careless move Veronica made became another piece of evidence in the web the grandparents were weaving. One afternoon, Veronica cornered Thomas in the study. "We need to finalize the remaining transfers," she said sharply. "It's for the best. Mom and Dad are old. They won't understand anything." Thomas hesitated for the first time. Deep down, he had always known his wife's ambition was dangerous, but the fear of confrontation had kept him silent. Alina, quietly observing from the doorway, noted his hesitation. It was the crack in the armor they had been waiting for. That evening, Henry sat at the grand piano, flipping through old family records, while Alina penned a series of letters documenting every financial and personal betrayal. They had discovered loopholes and protective clauses in their estate plans that could reverse the wrongful transfers. Patience had been their weapon, and it was now about to yield results. Veronica, growing increasingly impatient and overconfident, made her next critical mistake. In a move designed to isolate the grandparents, she attempted to evict them from a part of the mansion and take exclusive control of the estate. Thomas, now conflicted, hesitated and stumbled over his words in front of the staff, revealing cracks in their united front. Alina finally spoke, her voice calm but unwavering. "Veronica, you underestimate the years of wisdom and resilience we've earned. We will not be pushed aside. Your actions will have consequences." Henry added, "Greed blinds the mind, and the universe has a way of restoring balance. Your choices today will determine your tomorrow." Veronica's confidence faltered, her arrogance colliding with the grandparents' quiet but unyielding strength. Thomas, witnessing their composure and strategy, began to understand the depth of his parents' wisdom. For the first time, a shift occurred. The household, once under Veronica's manipulative control, began to sense the reversal. The grandparents, who had endured deception and betrayal, were now in motion, poised to reclaim not just their property, but their dignity, respect, and peace of mind. The mansion, silent witnesses to decades of family history, seemed to exhale in relief. The war of wit, patience, and courage was only beginning, but the first real cracks in the house of greed had appeared. The air in the mansion grew heavier with tension. Veronica, sensing that her grip was slipping, became reckless, she lashed out at staff, berated Thomas in front of everyone, and tried to force the grandparents into signing yet more documents. Every act of aggression, however, only exposed her greed and lack of foresight. Alina and Henry had grown accustomed to patience and strategy. They began their subtle counterattack. Every careless move Veronica made was catalogued, every harsh word recorded, and every attempt to manipulate Thomas quietly countered. They sought allies among the staff, loyal friends, and legal advisors who understood the intricacies of property law. One evening, Veronica demanded that Alina vacate the master bedroom. "You don't need it anymore," she snapped. "It's time to make room for us." Alina's hands trembled slightly, but her voice was firm. "This house has been ours for decades. Your impatience blinds you. Greed can only take you so far before it turns on you." Henry stood beside her, a pillar of unwavering support. "We have waited, observed, and prepared. Your arrogance has made you careless, and soon you will see the consequences of your actions." Veronica's first major miscalculation came when she attempted to remove the family safe from the mansion. She had overlooked the fact that Henry had installed secure locks and hidden backups. Within moments, her plan unraveled, leaving her exposed in front of the household staff. Thomas, finally seeing his wife's reckless behavior, began to question his loyalty. The grandparents seized the moment. Alina, with quiet authority, explained to Thomas the full extent of Veronica's manipulations. The evidence, painstakingly collected over weeks, laid bare the greed and deceit that had infiltrated their home. Thomas, realizing the truth, felt a wave of guilt and fear. Veronica's composure cracked. Her carefully constructed empire of manipulation began to crumble. The household staff, once intimidated, now stood firmly with Alina and Henry. Even Thomas, hesitant but resolute, sided with his parents. That night, as the mansion settled into an uneasy silence, Alina whispered to Henry, "The first wave has passed. Now we prepare for the next. Greed has made her reckless, but we will be ready for anything." Henry nodded, eyes glinting with quiet determination. "Patience, wisdom, and courage. These are our weapons, and soon justice will be served." Outside, the night wind rustled the trees, carrying with it a promise. The battle was far from over, but the tide was beginning to turn in favor of the rightful owners. The following morning, the mansion seemed to breathe a little easier. Veronica, still furious from the previous night, tried to assert control, but Alina and Henry were no longer passive. Their patience had paid off, and now it was time for careful, deliberate action. Alina had spent the night drafting letters and documenting Veronica's every misstep. Henry had contacted a trusted family lawyer, providing evidence of improper property transfers and highlighting the legal loopholes Veronica had carelessly ignored. Veronica, unaware of the preparations, demanded breakfast in the grand dining room, barking orders at the staff. "Make sure everything is ready for me," she snapped. "This house should run the way I say." Thomas, sitting silently, could no longer ignore the growing tension. He watched his wife berate the staff, demean his parents, and flaunt her ill-gotten control. A pang of guilt struck him, a sharp, undeniable realization that he had allowed greed to cloud his judgment. Alina, calm yet assertive, approached Veronica. "Your actions have consequences," she said, her voice steady. "You've attempted to manipulate the family, overstep your bounds, and control what is not yours. The law does not favor arrogance, only justice." Henry added, "We have kept records, documented your behavior, and ensured the security of our assets. Any attempt to harm or intimidate us will backfire. The truth is on our side." Veronica's confident facade faltered. Her carefully constructed plan, built on the assumption of Thomas's blind obedience and the grandparents' perceived weakness, was unraveling. Panic flickered in her eyes for the first time. Thomas, finally finding his voice, confronted her. "Veronica, what have we done? Mom and Dad, they only wanted to protect the family. And we," his voice cracked with emotion, "we let you control everything." Veronica, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to assert herself again, but the cracks in her armor were visible. The staff, loyal to Alina and Henry, stood silently, supporting the rightful owners of the home. That evening, the first legal steps were taken. Documents were reviewed, letters delivered, and Veronica's reckless maneuvers exposed. Slowly, methodically, Alina and Henry were reclaiming not just their property, but their dignity and peace of mind. The mansion, once shadowed by manipulation and greed, began to feel alive again. Its walls had witnessed decades of love, struggle, and now quiet triumph. Alina and Henry, standing together, felt a surge of resilience. They were not only surviving, they were beginning to win. Veronica's world was beginning to crumble. Her overconfidence had blinded her to the meticulous planning of Alina and Henry. The grandparents had not only secured legal backing, but also rallied the household staff, friends, and trusted advisors to their side. Slowly, the tides were turning. One afternoon, Veronica stormed into the study, papers in hand. "I want the rest of the property transferred immediately," she demanded, her voice trembling with frustration. "I've done everything for this family." Alina, calm and composed, looked up from her notes. "Everything you've done has been for yourself. Veronica, your greed has blinded you to the truth. And now, the law will reveal it." Henry added quietly, "Your actions have consequences. We have the evidence, the documents you carelessly left unattended, the manipulations you orchestrated. They will not go unnoticed." Thomas, witnessing the confrontation, finally spoke up. "Veronica, I can't let this continue. I've been blind, but I see it now. Mom and Dad, they are right. We've been wrong." His voice carried shame and regret. Veronica's confident facade crumbled. The lawyer presented the documentation Alina and Henry had meticulously compiled. Unauthorized transfers, evidence of coercion, and manipulation of household staff. Every move Veronica had made was laid bare. The first legal blow struck. Veronica's attempts to seize the property were invalidated due to improper procedures and clear evidence of her manipulations. She tried to argue, to intimidate, but the calm authority of Alina and Henry, backed by the law, left her powerless. That evening, Alina and Henry sat together in the grand living room. Watching the sunset, the mansion, once heavy with tension and deceit, seemed lighter. "It's not over yet," Henry said, "but patience, wisdom, and courage always win in the end." Alina nodded. "We've faced betrayal, deceit, and arrogance, and now, we begin to reclaim not just our property, but our peace and dignity." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, as if nature itself acknowledged the shift. The battle was far from over, but the grandparents had reclaimed the moral high ground, and the first taste of justice had been served. Veronica's arrogance had finally met the harsh reality of her actions. Each day brought a new legal setback, and the evidence Alina and Henry had carefully gathered made it impossible for her to continue her manipulations. The once confident woman now moved through the mansion like a shadow of her former self, tense, cautious, and constantly aware of every misstep. Thomas, torn between loyalty and morality, began to distance himself from Veronica's schemes. He watched as his parents, with quiet dignity, orchestrated every move with patience and intelligence. Shame and guilt weighed heavily on him, forcing him to confront the consequences of his inaction. One morning, Alina and Henry called a meeting with the household staff and Thomas. Alina's voice was firm but gentle. "Veronica's choices have shown her true character. Greed and deceit can never triumph over wisdom and patience. We will reclaim what is rightfully ours, and in doing so, restore balance to this household." Henry added, "This is not about revenge. It's about justice, integrity, and the principles we've lived by. Today marks a turning point, not just for us, but for everyone who believes in fairness." Veronica, realizing she had no allies left, tried one last desperate move, threatening legal action and attempting to manipulate Thomas again. But Thomas, now aware of her deceit, refused to be swayed. "No, Veronica," he said firmly, "I won't let you harm them anymore. This ends now." The final legal actions were swift. Improper property transfers were reversed, unauthorized documents nullified, and Veronica's attempts to seize control invalidated. She was left with nothing but her own arrogance and the bitter taste of failure. Alina and Henry, though weary from the emotional battle, stood victorious, their dignity intact, their property secure, and their peace restored. They finally allowed themselves a quiet moment of triumph. Thomas, remorseful but enlightened, embraced his parents. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I should have seen it sooner." Alina smiled softly, placing a gentle hand on his cheek. "It's never too late to recognize the truth. Thomas, let this be a lesson in patience, courage, and integrity." As the sun set over the mansion, the shadows of deceit lifted. The home, once darkened by greed and betrayal, glowed warmly once more. The grandparents had endured, persisted and triumphed, not through force, but through wisdom, patience, and unwavering moral strength. And somewhere in the quiet, Veronica realized too late that her greed had destroyed her own path, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices. Karma, relentless and just, had spoken. The mansion, once a battlefield of greed and manipulation, now felt alive with peace. Eleanor and Henry moved through their home with quiet satisfaction, their dignity intact and their hearts lighter than they had been in months. The shadows of Veronica's deception had finally lifted, replaced by the warmth of justice and moral victory. Thomas, humbled and remorseful, approached his parents one morning. "Mom, Dad, I can't believe how blind I was. I let her control me, control this house. I'm so sorry." Eleanor smiled, her eyes soft with compassion. "Thomas, recognizing the truth is the first step. We all make mistakes, but courage and honesty can restore what was lost." Henry placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Your journey doesn't end here. Learn from this, protect what is right, and never let greed cloud your heart again." Veronica, now powerless, had retreated into her own world of regret. Her manipulations had failed, her schemes exposed, and the life she sought to claim through deceit was gone. She had no one to blame but herself. With the household restored, Eleanor and Henry began to enjoy the simple joys of life once more. Henry tended to his beloved garden, the roses blooming brighter than ever, a silent testament to his perseverance. Eleanor filled the kitchen with the aroma of fresh bread and coffee, a space alive with warmth and comfort. The staff, once intimidated and manipulated, now worked alongside the grandparents with loyalty and respect. The mansion, a symbol of decades of love, hard work and wisdom, had reclaimed its harmony. One evening, as the sun set and bathed the home in a golden glow, Eleanor and Henry sat together on the veranda. Holding hands, "We survived greed, deceit and betrayal," Eleanor whispered, "and we did it together." Henry nodded, a soft smile on his face. "Patience, wisdom, and love always triumph. This is our victory, not over anyone else, but for ourselves and the life we've built." Thomas joined them, his heart full of gratitude and remorse. "I will never forget what you've taught me," he said quietly. "Integrity, patience, and courage, these are the true treasures." And in that moment, the mansion was more than a home. It was a sanctuary of love, resilience, and the enduring strength of family. The grandparents had faced adversity, outwitted greed, and emerged victorious, their legacy secure and their hearts at peace. Outside, the world continued on, but within those walls, justice had been served, and happiness, hard-earned and genuine, had returned at last. The days following their victory were quiet but filled with reflection. Eleanor and Henry knew that reclaiming their property was not just a legal battle. It was a triumph of patience, wisdom, and moral strength. Yet, the story was not complete without the final reckoning for Veronica. Veronica, having exhausted every scheme, found herself isolated. Friends who had once been impressed by her ambition now turned away, seeing the truth of her greed. Thomas, having learned a painful but crucial lesson, refused any further complicity. Every attempt she made to manipulate others or reclaim control was met with resistance. One morning, a notice arrived. Legal action had been finalized. All properties and assets were secured under Eleanor and Henry's names, and Veronica was formally barred from making any claims. Her reputation, once carefully curated, was publicly tarnished. Eleanor, reflecting on the outcome, spoke to Henry softly. "It's a shame it had to come to this. Greed has a way of destroying even the strongest bonds." Henry nodded, "But it also shows that integrity, patience, and wisdom endure. The law was on our side." "Yes, but more than that, our values were stronger." Thomas, witnessing his parents' composure and resilience, approached them with newfound respect. "Mom, Dad, you've taught me the most important lesson of my life. That true power isn't wealth or manipulation. It's patience, integrity, and courage." Meanwhile, Veronica faced the bitter reality of her choices. Opportunities she had once sought slipped through her fingers. Former allies refused her calls. The very ambition that had driven her had now left her alone and regretful. Her downfall was complete, not through violence or vengeance, but through the inexorable force of justice and karma. In contrast, Eleanor and Henry embraced their life fully. Their home was restored, their peace secure, and their hearts unburdened. The mansion, filled with laughter and love once more, became a symbol of resilience against deceit and greed. One evening, sitting together on their veranda, Henry whispered, "We've endured betrayal, greed, and humiliation, and still, we have each other, our dignity, and our legacy." Eleanor smiled, eyes glistening with emotion. "And that's worth more than any fortune. Today, the house, the family, and our hearts are at peace. We've truly won." Outside, the wind carried a gentle calm through the trees. Justice had been served, karma had taken its course, and the grandparents' story of resilience, wisdom, and ultimate triumph had reached its emotional zenith. With the final legal battles behind them, Eleanor and Henry finally allowed themselves to breathe fully. The mansion, once heavy with tension and fear, now radiated warmth and serenity. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating the memories etched into every corner, the laughter, the milestones, and now the triumph over greed and deceit. The household staff, once intimidated and manipulated by Veronica, celebrated quietly with the grandparents. Simple gestures, a freshly brewed cup of tea, smiles exchanged, and soft words of gratitude reminded Eleanor and Henry that loyalty, kindness, and respect could never be bought or coerced. Thomas, humbled and reflective, began to mend the bond with his parents. "Mom, Dad, I don't know how to repay what you've done. Not just for the house, but for the lesson you've given me." Eleanor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Thomas, it's not about repayment. It's about learning. Let this be a reminder that true strength lies in integrity, patience, and love." Henry smiled, glancing around at the restored harmony. "And remember, family is more than wealth or possessions. It's the connection, trust, and mutual respect that endure." Word of the grandparents' resilience spread quietly through their community. Friends, neighbors, and even distant relatives reached out to offer congratulations, admiration, and support. Eleanor and Henry's story became one of inspiration, a testament to the idea that age, wisdom, and patience could overcome even the most calculated deceit. Even Veronica, now isolated and facing the consequences of her actions, could not tarnish the respect and legacy the grandparents had built. The law had restored their assets, but more importantly, life itself had restored balance. One evening, as the golden light of sunset bathed the mansion, Eleanor and Henry stood on the veranda. "Hand in hand, we've faced greed, betrayal, and humiliation," Eleanor whispered. "But we've emerged stronger, wiser, and happier than ever." Henry nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "Our legacy isn't just in the walls or the wealth, it's in the resilience, love, and wisdom we've passed down. And that, my dear, is truly priceless." The mansion, once a battlefield, now stood as a sanctuary. Its halls echoed with laughter, warmth, and peace. Eleanor and Henry, having endured the storm, finally embraced the serenity they had fought so valiantly to reclaim. With the household restored, Eleanor and Henry focused on rebuilding the bond with Thomas. The months of betrayal and tension had left scars, but now there was room for reflection, understanding, and healing. One afternoon, Eleanor invited Thomas into the library, a place where countless memories of the family had been made. "Thomas," she said softly, "it's important to understand why greed and deception can never last. They destroy trust, relationships, and even the person who wields them." Henry nodded, leaning against the bookshelf. "We've endured your wife's schemes." "Yes, but our patience and wisdom allowed us to protect what mattered most. Remember this lesson, not just for yourself, but for the family you'll lead in the future." Thomas, his eyes glistening with emotion, took their hands. "I understand now. Mom, Dad, I allowed myself to be blind, but I see clearly today. I will protect this family, and I will not repeat the mistakes I've made." Meanwhile, Veronica faced the full consequences of her actions. Her social circle had abandoned her. Legal penalties reminded her of her recklessness, and the reputation she had tried to build through deceit was irreparably tarnished. She wandered through life alone, a constant reminder that greed and manipulation only bring isolation and regret. Back at the mansion, Eleanor and Henry found solace in small, joyful routines. Henry tended to the garden, teaching Thomas the art of patience through the careful cultivation of roses. Eleanor, meanwhile, shared cherished family recipes and stories, passing on wisdom through laughter and love. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Eleanor raised a glass to integrity, patience, and love. She toasted, "May we always remember that true wealth is measured not in possessions, but in the strength of our hearts and bonds." Thomas smiled, filled with gratitude and newfound respect. To Mom and Dad, the true guardians of this family. Outside, the sunset painted the mansion in golden hues, a perfect reflection of resilience, wisdom, and triumph. The past had tested them, but the present offered a promise, a life filled with love, peace, and moral victory. Veronica, though living, became a cautionary tale of greed, a stark contrast to the warmth, respect, and joy that now filled the home she once tried to claim. The following months were filled with a serene rhythm. Eleanor and Henry, having reclaimed their home, property, and dignity, settled into a life of quiet joy. The mansion, once shadowed by deceit, now echoed with laughter, soft music, and the gentle bustle of family and loyal staff. Thomas, humbled and wise, became a devoted son, learning from his parents the importance of patience, integrity, and courage. Together, they spent hours in the garden, tending roses and vegetables, sharing stories of the past, and teaching each other lessons in life, love, and resilience. Elinor began hosting small gatherings for neighbors and friends, sharing not just meals, but wisdom earned through decades of trials. The community admired the couple, not merely for their wealth, but for the grace, strength, and dignity with which they had faced betrayal. Even small acts of kindness became powerful symbols. Henry repaired fences and furniture for neighbors, while Elinor mentored young women in the neighborhood about financial independence and moral courage. Their life had become a living testament to the values they held dear. Veronica, having lost everything she sought to seize, became a shadow in the background, a constant reminder of the consequences of greed. Meanwhile, Elinor and Henry's story spread quietly, inspiring respect, admiration, and moral reflection throughout their community. One golden evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elinor looked out over the gardens. Henry at her side. "We've endured storms, deception and greed," she whispered. "And yet here we are, stronger than ever." Henry smiled, squeezing her hand. "Our life, our love, our patience, that is the true legacy. Everything else is fleeting." Thomas joined them, eyes bright with understanding and gratitude. "I will carry these lessons forward. Mom, Dad, the family, the values, the strength, you've shown me what truly matters." As night fell, the mansion glowed under the moonlight, a symbol of resilience, love, and moral triumph. Elinor and Henry, victorious in every sense that truly mattered, had not only reclaimed their home and property, but had secured the heart and soul of their family. Outside, the world continued its march, but within those walls, justice, patience, and integrity had prevailed, and peace reigned at last. The years of struggle, betrayal, and tension had finally come to a close. Elinor and Henry, standing together on the veranda of their beloved mansion, looked out over the garden where roses bloomed in brilliant colors, symbols of their resilience and patience. Every blossom reflected a lesson learned, a battle endured, and a victory earned. Thomas, now a wiser and more responsible son, joined them. He held his parents' hands, his eyes filled with admiration and regret. "Mom, Dad, I've learned the true meaning of strength. It's not wealth, not property, but patience, integrity, and love." Elinor smiled, her eyes misty. "And we've proven that even in the face of betrayal and greed, wisdom and courage prevail. Life will always test us, but it is how we respond that defines our legacy." Henry, his arm around Elinor, nodded. Veronica's choices have led her to her own downfall. Her greed, manipulation, and arrogance isolated her. Karma has its way, and justice, though patient, is inevitable. Indeed, Veronica's world had completely crumbled. She had lost the respect of all who knew her. Friends and acquaintances distanced themselves, and legal actions confirmed her failure. Her attempts to regain power were futile. Alone, isolated, and faced with the consequences of her ambition, she became a living testament to the dangers of greed. Meanwhile, the grandparents' life blossomed. Their home overflowed with love, laughter, and harmony. The community celebrated them not for their wealth, but for their unwavering moral strength and resilience. Neighbors sought their advice. Young people admired their wisdom, and the mansion became a sanctuary of guidance and inspiration. Elinor and Henry's days were filled with simple joys: gardening, sharing family recipes, teaching Thomas the importance of integrity, and enjoying quiet evenings together. Their love, forged over decades, shone brighter than any treasure. One evening, as the sun painted the sky with hues of gold and crimson, Elinor turned to Henry. "We've endured storms we never imagined, faced betrayal we never anticipated, and yet we stand here stronger, wiser, and happier." Henry smiled, squeezing her hand. "This is our victory, not over others, but for ourselves. Peace, love, and integrity are the true rewards of life." Thomas, standing beside them, whispered, "Thank you, Mom and Dad. Your courage has shown me the way, and I promise to carry your legacy forward." And so the mansion, once shadowed by deceit, now glowed with warmth, love, and triumph. Elinor and Henry had not only reclaimed their home and property, but had secured the heart and soul of their family. Justice had prevailed, karma had taken its course, and the true heroes, patience, wisdom, and moral strength, had emerged victorious. Outside, the night was calm, the stars shining above as if celebrating the final. Well-earned peace, the grandparents had endured, outwitted greed and emerged victorious, not through force, but through intelligence, patience, and unwavering love. Their story, one of betrayal, struggle, and ultimate triumph, would be remembered for generations.